A prince whose identity may have been written in scandal. And now, shocking new claims, forensic whispers, and DNA murmurs threaten to upend everything we thought we knew about Prince Harry's lineage. This isn't tabloid gossip anymore. What was once just rumor now stands on the edge of revelation, and the palace can't silence it this time. Because when DNA speaks, even kings must listen. And it all begins with the question the palace has spent years avoiding. For years, a question lingered in whispers, passed from tabloids to dinner tables, yet never spoken aloud by the people who mattered most. Was Prince Harry truly the son of King Charles? Or was there another truth hiding in plain sight, one that the palace desperately wanted to keep buried? It was the kind of question that struck at the very heart of monarchy. Blood, lineage, legitimacy. And though it was often dismissed as idle gossip, something about it refused to die. The public had always noticed the difference. Where Prince William mirrored his father with sharp features and receding hair, Harry was the outlier. The red hair, the softer jawline, the striking resemblance not to Charles, but to another man entirely. James Hewitt, the former cavalry officer, who had once captured the affection of Princess Diana. The rumors began early, before Harry could even vote, and they only grew louder as the years passed. Every grainy side-by-side photo, every whisper from royal watchers, every passing comment in the press kept the question alive. Was the wrong man listed as his father? The timeline made it worse. Diana had publicly admitted to an affair with Hewitt, an admission that sent shockwaves through the monarchy. But the official narrative insisted that the relationship began after Harry was born. That detail, though critical, was murky at best. Hewitt himself had both confirmed and denied things over the years, adding fuel to a fire that never quite burned out. And still, the palace maintained an icy silence, never addressing the claims directly, but always responding with swift legal threats when lines were crossed. What struck many was not just the refusal to speak, but the intensity of the effort to silence others. Journalists warned off, biographers pressured to omit. Interviews cut short the moment the topic emerged. It wasn't just about privacy, it felt like protection. Of what, exactly, no one knew. But the harder the palace pushed back, the more it looked like they were hiding something. And the more the public asked, why would they fight so hard if there was nothing to fear? Behind closed doors, the tension was even more pronounced. Insiders spoke of moments where even Charles himself seemed distant from Harry in ways that went beyond normal royal restraint. Whispers from former aides suggested that the rumors had caused deep fractures, ones that no PR team could ever fully mend. Harry, growing up in this fog of quiet denial and public curiosity, would never speak of it. But those close to him say the damage ran deep. Because it wasn't just a question of who his father was. It was a question of whether the institution he was born into had ever truly accepted him. But as the world questioned Harry's looks, few knew how much pain that question caused behind palace doors. In the gilded chaos of the royal world, few stories were more scandalous, more quietly feared than the one Diana herself eventually confirmed. She had fallen in love with someone else, not a fellow aristocrat, not a royal confidant, but a soldier, a cavalry officer named James Hewitt. And though the confession came years after their affair ended, the damage had already been done. Because the moment Diana acknowledged the bond, the public began to do the math. And the math didn't add up. The timing was everything. Diana said, the affair began after Prince Harry's birth. That was the line, clear, official, and endlessly repeated. But behind that timeline stood 1,000 inconsistencies. Letters, photographs, secondhand stories whispered in drawing rooms and across media circles. The way she spoke of Hewitt in private, with a tenderness rarely reserved for Charles. The way Hewitt himself sometimes contradicted the palace's version of events, only to pull back days later. The inconsistencies weren't proof, but they were cracks, and through those cracks, suspicion flooded in. Diana's emotional state during those years only deepened the intrigue. Her marriage, by then, had unraveled into icy formality. Charles was cold, distant, and deeply entangled with Camilla. Diana was left to navigate her role as a young mother in a loveless union, isolated by the institution she was meant to elevate. She wasn't just lonely, she was broken. And into that emotional void stepped James Hewitt. Young, charismatic, attentive, everything Charles wasn't. Their connection wasn't just physical. It was a rare moment of safety for a woman surrounded by judgment and pressure. In Hewitt, she found not just a lover, but a refuge. But Hewitt, too, became a prisoner of that bond. Over the years, his story shifted. Sometimes he denied the possibility of being Harry's father outright. Other times, he danced around the truth, suggesting things that only fueled speculation. Friends close to him hinted that he knew more than he ever admitted publicly. And while he claimed to protect Diana's legacy, his half-confessions left a trail of confusion that refused to fade. It was never about a clear admission. It was about the doubt he never erased. And the palace? Their response was silence, wrapped in threat. Any journalist daring to explore the matter too deeply would find themselves cut off. Biographers were warned. Insiders were pressured. It wasn't just about protecting Diana. It was about protecting the crown. Because if even a shadow of truth existed in the whispers, it meant a future king might not be a royal at all. And that was a truth the monarchy could never afford. But the more they buried the truth, the more it threatened to rise, especially when DNA came into play. For years, it was just a whisper and rumor passed in coded phrases behind closed doors, quietly circulating among royal insiders. A DNA test, not hypothetical, not speculative, real. A test reportedly conducted in the early 2000s, designed to put an end to the questions that had haunted Prince Harry since boyhood. The results? Never made public. The existence of the test? Never confirmed by the palace. But the whispers never stopped. In fact, they only grew louder. Insiders say the test was conducted discreetly, away from official records, under the pretense of a private medical screening. It wasn't authorized by the Queen. It wasn't handled by royal doctors. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because if the monarchy wasn't behind it, who was? And why keep it hidden? The answer, according to some, lies in what the test revealed. A result so explosive, so irreversibly damaging, it couldn't be allowed to surface. What's resurfaced in 2025, however, has shattered that long-held silence. A royal biographer known for previous palace-approved works quietly stepped away from his publisher after reportedly reviewing a confidential document that he claimed changed everything. In an encrypted conversation that was later leaked, he revealed the document referenced a genetic test that showed a mismatch, not between Harry and Diana, but between Harry and Charles. The implications were immediate and terrifying, because
if the document was authentic, it didn't just suggest that Charles might not be Harry's biological father, it hinted that other circle had known for decades. Comment: the authenticity of the claim remains
hotly debated. Some insist it's a forgery, part of a larger media scheme to destabilize the monarchy during a delicate transition of power. Others believe it's the exact opposite, a last-ditch effort by a conscience-stricken insider to expose the truth before history is permanently rewritten. Private discussions among royal watchers, journalists, and historians have reignited in full force. Not about whether the test happened, but about whether the truth had always been just inches from the surface, hidden by tradition, protected by fear. And through all of this, one question grows louder. Did Harry know? His behavior in recent years, his cutting departure from royal duties, the emotional confessions in his memoir, the tone of betrayal in his interviews, suddenly take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of hidden truth. His references to feeling like an outsider, to questioning his role, to the line about being born into a story I never wrote. They no longer sound like metaphor. They sound like revelation. And if Harry knew, what did that mean for his choices after leaving the monarchy? When Prince Harry walked away from royal life, the world assumed it was for love. A modern prince, unwilling to let the crown crush the woman he adored. And yes, Meghan was central to the story. She was the catalyst, the voice that refused to be silenced. But behind the headlines, behind the Netflix deals and Oprah interviews, there was something deeper. Something Harry never fully said, but always hinted at. He didn't just leave because of Meghan. He left because of something that had been burning inside him long before she entered the picture. Something that began with a single, unresolved question. Who am I, really? The signs were always there, long before Megxit, long before tabloid wars and royal rifts. Those close to Harry say the tension between him and his father had been growing, quietly, for years. Subtle at first, missed moments, awkward exchanges, the sense that Charles struggled to relate to the son who seemed emotionally raw, unpredictable, and relentlessly independent. As Harry grew older, that distance widened, and as rumors about his paternity resurfaced year after year, so too did the emotional gap between father and son. It wasn't just about headlines anymore, it was about identity. In Spare, Harry didn't name names, but he didn't have to. The memoir was laced with words that bled. I always felt like I didn't fit, he wrote, like I was the extra. He questioned his role in the family, his value within the institution, his place in a world that often treated him as both essential and expendable. The tone wasn't angry, it was haunted. It was as if Harry was carrying a weight no one else in the family had ever dared to name. And the longer he stayed inside the palace walls, the heavier that weight became. Meghan didn't cause the fire. She just gave it oxygen. Her arrival didn't introduce tension, it revealed it. And when the royal machinery began to close in, trying to contain the couple's influence, Harry didn't hesitate. Because the truth is, he had already been preparing to walk away. Meghan simply gave him a reason that the world could understand. But inside, he had already left long before he packed his bags, and when you look closely, the most explosive part of his departure wasn't the public fallout. It was the emotional withdrawal from Charles, the man who raised him, the man he once admired. Somewhere along the line, that admiration fractured. Whether it was because of the way Charles handled Diana, or because of something even more personal, something tied to blood, no one can say for sure. But when the legitimacy of that bloodline is quietly questioned, every moment of tension between father and son takes on new meaning. And just when it seemed things had calmed, a royal insider stepped forward with the shock of the decade. It started with a whisper, then a leak, then an eruption that threatened to shake the very pillars of Buckingham Palace. A former royal staffer once trusted, once silent, broke the code. Not for fame, not for money, but, as he claimed, because the truth had been buried for too long. According to him, the palace hadn't just heard the rumors about Prince Harry's paternity, they had investigated them, discreetly, quietly, and the results were far more damning than anyone had ever imagined. A DNA comparison had allegedly taken place. Not commissioned through official medical channels, but arranged through an untraceable back door. Conducted years ago, when whispers about James Hewitt and Harry's resemblance reached a fever pitch in private corridors. The staffer claimed he had seen the documentation with his own eyes, papers marked for destruction, stamped confidential, buried within weeks of their arrival. And what they showed was more than just biological doubt. They revealed a genetic mismatch, one that ruled out Charles entirely. The staffer didn't stop there. What he revealed next sent shockwaves through royal watchers. Prince Philip, known for his iron resolve and strict loyalty to royal tradition, was reportedly furious. Not because of the rumors those he'd lived with for years, but because the palace had allowed the test to happen at all. In his eyes, some questions weren't meant to be answered, especially not with science. The monarchy, after all, was built on perception, not proof. It was about symbols, not cells. But now, that delicate illusion had been cracked wide open. Behind closed doors, crisis meetings followed. Advisors debated strategy. Some wanted to address the rumors head-on to deny, control, and redirect. Others warned that any acknowledgement would only breathe new life into the scandal. In the end, silence won. The documents were allegedly sealed or destroyed, and a quiet order was passed down. This never happened. But the problem with truth is that it rarely stays buried, especially when too many hands have touched it. If the confession was to be believed, the monarchy hadn't just suppressed a secret, it had suppressed a legacy-altering truth. The idea that the heir and the spare might not share a father wasn't just a tabloid punchline anymore. It was a genetic reality, one powerful enough to challenge royal succession, international perception, and the very identity of a man born into the crown's shadow. The palace, of course, declined comment, but the silence rang louder than any denial ever could. Because in the absence of transparency, belief becomes shaped by suspicion. And the more the institution avoided the question, the more the public began to wonder, what else have they hidden? And while the palace buried the truth, Harry was making another quiet move, one that hinted he already knew. It was the last call that truly mattered. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Just days before the Oprah interview that would shake the royal foundation, Prince Harry picked up the phone one final time to speak to his father. Charles, always guarded, measured, tried to keep things civil. But Harry had already crossed a line in his heart. The conversation was brief, tense, hollow. Not a fight, not a reconciliation. Just silence, where there should have been understanding. The moment the call ended, so did something else. Whatever thread had been holding father and son together finally snapped. In the weeks that followed, Harry stopped referring to Charles almost entirely. In speeches, interviews, even in heartfelt tributes, he began to reference only Diana, her influence, her love, her spirit. He called her his guiding force, the voice he still heard in moments of confusion. And Charles? Absent, not demonized, not defended, just missing, erased. It was as if Harry had drawn a line in his own legacy, one that divided him not only from the institution, but from the man who had once raised him. And then came Spare, a memoir cloaked in vulnerability, but pulsing with quiet rage. Harry described growing up in the shadow of his older brother, of never quite fitting, of always wondering why the love he craved felt conditional. The book was filled with phrases like, my truth, my story, my reality. Words that echoed deeper for those paying close attention. Because when a man begins to speak of truth that differs from history, it often means he's seen something he can never unsee, something that rewrites everything. It was Meghan, some say, who helped him face it, who asked the hard questions no one else dared to, who encouraged him to seek answers, not just from his past, but from within himself. Through therapy, interviews, and finally, writing, Harry began to unearth feelings he had long buried under protocol and public duty. Feelings of betrayal, of alienation, of wondering whether he had ever truly belonged in the world he was born into, and whether the man called father had ever seen him as fully his. The result was more than a physical break. From the monarchy, it was emotional exile. Harry wasn't just rejecting the crown, he was rejecting the version of himself that had been molded by it. Every distance created, every word left unsaid, every memory redefined wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. And though the monarchy tried to preserve its image, the image of father and son was already shattered. But if not Charles, then who does Harry truly come from? For decades, his name hovered at the edge of royal scandal. James Hewitt, the man many believe could be Prince Harry's real father. But while the world obsessed over resemblances, timelines, and whispers in the press, Hewitt himself did something unexpected. He disappeared. After a string of early interviews and tabloid teases, he went silent. No dramatic reveal, no press tour, just absence. And in that absence, the mystery only deepened. His denials, when they came, were inconsistent. At times, he firmly stated that Harry was already born before his relationship with Diana began. Other times, he offered vague responses that only fueled speculation. One moment he claimed to be protecting the memory of Diana. Another, he hinted that too. Much honesty could bring danger or disgrace. It was never the content of his words that raised eyebrows. It was the tone, the hesitation, the pauses between sentences, the strange balance between defensiveness and sorrow. To some, it felt like a man torn between truth and loyalty. To others, it sounded like someone who had made a promise to a woman long gone and was now living in the weight of that promise. Friends of Hewitt say he has long struggled with the media's obsession, not because it embarrassed him, but because it violated something sacred. Diana, by all accounts, meant more to him than the public ever understood. He once described their love as pure, and those close to him insist he never truly moved on. Perhaps that's why he's never capitalized on the story, why he never pushed for attention when the world practically begged for a headline. In a world full of voices, shouting for relevance, Hewitt's silence was its own kind of statement. But the question remains, would Harry ever want confirmation? Would he want the truth carved in scientific stone, or has he already decided which truth matters more? It's possible he's known for years. It's possible he doesn't want to know at all. Because the answer to that question isn't just about biology, it's about identity. And identity isn't always found in blood. Sometimes it's found in absence, in questions that never get answered, in the space between doubt and acceptance. The tragedy of Harry's story may not be that he doesn't know who his father is. It may be that he's never been allowed to ask the question without tearing his entire world apart. And yet, even through this mystery, one truth has never been denied. In the end, the question of blood may stir intrigue. It may ignite scandal, dominate headlines, and even shake the walls of the monarchy. But it will never define Prince Harry. Because whether Charles is his biological father or not, Harry has carved out a legacy that no DNA test can touch. His influence, his rebellion, his courage, his pain has transcended titles, bloodlines, and birthright. He didn't inherit his power. He earned it. What made Harry a force wasn't the throne he walked away from. It was the love that shaped him. Diana's love. Fierce, protective, flawed, and unforgettable. It was in her arms that he first learned to care for others. It was through her eyes that he saw the cracks in the royal armor. And it was her loss that awakened a fire in him, a relentless pursuit of purpose, even when the world demanded he stay silent. Where others clung to tradition, Harry searched for meaning, not in his crown, but in his conscience. That search would take him places no royal had gone. Into war zones, into hospitals, into the stories of wounded soldiers whose suffering mirrored his own emotional scars. He didn't show up with empty gestures. He built something lasting the Invictus Games, a movement for those who had been broken and rebuilt. It wasn't just charity, it was identity. It was service that came not from royal obligation, but from personal reckoning. He opened up about his struggles with grief, with anxiety, with feeling lost in the palace of gold. And in doing so, he gave others the permission to speak, to heal, to be human. That was the moment he stopped being a prince by title and became a prince by impact. And it didn't stop there. Alongside Meghan, he redefined the concept of royalty, not as something inherited, but as something lived through action, empathy, and truth. He rejected the hollow rituals of pageantry and chose the raw vulnerability of purpose. The world may never know the full truth about his bloodline, and maybe that's okay, because legacy isn't born in biology. It's built in moments of courage, in decisions that cost everything, in standing up when every tradition says, sit down. And Harry has done that again and again. The monarchy may not have always embraced him, but history will. Not as the lost prince, or the rebel son, or even the outsider, but as a man who shattered centuries of silence with a single, unwavering truth. Because when history remembers Prince Harry, it won't be for whose blood runs in his veins, but for the fire that runs in his heart. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.